Remember when you'd boot up your family computer by kicking the power button with your gross ass feet and then hearing that da-da-da-da-da startup noise? Me neither, I'm not old enough for that, but trust me, I do in fact have authority. For some reason, computers making sounds has turned into its own little subculture, which, I mean, I can see why. It's the first thing that happens when you turn on the thing. But why? How? When? Or is it? Things started a long time ago in the faraway galaxy of the 1970s when computers would beep to indicate that they are in fact checking their whopping 1 kilobyte of memory, or that said kilobyte of memory is DOA, they can go cry about it. This was called posting, and also sometimes happened visually if you were a huge nerd, geek, dork, or any other synonym for loser. In 1984, a tiny little company called Apple Computer Incorporated released their Macintosh computer. God, that's such a dorky name, I hope it doesn't catch on. It started up with a little and that was enough. The thing took 3 years to make. In fact, it took so long to make that new, better things came out while they were making the computer, so they had to rebuild everything from scratch, which prompted one guy to be like, hey, here's this algorithm that can make sounds, and the guy who was responsible for the sounds is like, okay, and that was that. Whoops, it's still 1984, and Roland, the musical instrument company, releases the MPU 401, which is not some little device from Star Trek. It's something that allows you to connect this cool little new thing called Midi to your computer. It's basically just computer music. And it also allows you to output Midi music through your speakers. This was huge. I mean, you ever heard of Doom? You know, the that was a big deal! In 1987, Kovacs releases the Speech Thing, terrible name, which plugs into your computer's printer port. It is so simple that people just end up building their own. The thing's a digital to analog converter, which basically just outputs the thing from your computer through your analog speakers. This was huge. I mean, you ever heard of Doom? So in 1967, this guy named John Chowning, down on some good old craft dinner, develops this thing called FM synthesis. You know, FM, like the thing on your radio. This is different. It basically uses tones, like little sine waves, like the little beeps, and people use to censor swear words, and they use them to control how another tone sounds. I know it's confusing. So then in the 70s, Yamaha uses this to make their own little musical instruments. In 1987, I'm starting to sense a pattern here. Some boys up in Canada make this thing called the Adlib music synthesizer using this. Which is like, Jesus Christ, this thing starts selling faster than things from the 1980s. Garage door openers. And then this company called Creative Labs is like, can we please have some of your sales? We definitely won't be the reason you go bankrupt in a couple years. And then they developed this behemoth, the Sound Blaster. What is with these names? He uses something called pulse code modulation, you know, the thing that makes CDs work, to output sound somehow. I don't know, I'm not a mathematician. In 1988, Apple made the AIF, which was one of, if not the first little type of digital audio file that can be played through a computer that's not entirely dependent on how the hardware to how the thing sounds, and if it even does sound at all, except for the little hi-hat 3 minutes into the song. God damn it, I'm mad again. The big problem with the AIF is that it's huge. 10 megabytes for every minute of music. Now, I'm no mathematician, but considering that the average hard drive was approximately 40 megabytes at the time, it fits in the square hole. Uh-oh, here comes Microsoft. And a bunch of other companies, but specifically Microsoft. 1991 comes around and the multimedia PC standard is developed, which is basically just put these things in your computer, including a CD-ROM drive, and we'll put our little logo on your computer. Then Microsoft makes their own edition of Windows. Oh yeah, I haven't talked about Windows yet, kind of a big deal. This is called Windows Graphical Environment with Multimedia Extensions 1.0. I'm just gonna call it Multimedia Windows. And alongside it comes the WAV file, which is Microsoft's answer to the AIF, and it's also huge. Multimedia Windows also introduced Windows Media Player, which is basically just a shell for something called MCI, or Multimedia Control Interface, which controls your sound cards, your video cards, your CD-ROM drives, Winston Smith, its big brother. We're back to 1984! Also in 1991, Apple releases version 7 of their Macintosh operating system, also known as System 7, which introduces some little sound effects for errors and whatnot. Speaking of Apple, you ever heard of the Beatles? Their record label was called Apple Corps, very creative name I know. Apple Computer was founded in 1976, and in 1978, when they were fresh out of the womb, Apple got sued by Apple over trademark infringement, and they settled in 1981 for an agreement that Apple Corps would never step into the computer market, and Apple Computer would never step into the music market. Can you imagine a Paul McCartney fax machine? In 1991, when Apple were making System 7, they put an error sound in called chimes, which scared the hell out of everyone at the company because, what the lawsuit? The dude who was making the sounds, Jim Reeks, of B.O. because he works at Apple. Was like, okay, screw them. What if we call it Let It Beep? You know, like the Beatles song, Let It Be? And everyone was like, absolutely not. And the guy was like, what? So sue me. And then that was the name of the sound. They called it So Sue Me. They just passed it off as Japanese so legal wouldn't get mad. 1992, Windows 3.1 comes around, and it's the first widespread release of Windows to have these sound effects inside of it. The system booted up with this sound, which you've almost certainly only heard if you played Sword Fight on the Heights on Roblox in 2009. The sound it made was called chimes, because Microsoft weren't pussies like Apple. Yeah. Also in 1992, the Beach Boys, these guys from the 60s, released their album Summer in Paradise. Now this thing stinks, don't get me wrong, but it was one of the first albums ever made with this new little program called Pro Tools. It was one of, if not the first digital audio workstation, or DAW, D-A-W for short. It allowed you to make the music on the computer. Windows 95 comes around in 1995, who would have figured. Now computer sound design gets serious. Brian Eno, which your dad might know for producing some of his favorite music, made this little sound, you might have heard it. Now the funny thing is, Brian Eno has never used a PC in his life. He made the sound on a Mac, nothing is real. It's 1997 and Intel make the AC97. A lot of manufacturers put it on their motherboards instead of leaving people to put in big bulky sound cards themselves, which basically marks the beginning of the end for these little guys. Creative are still going, however, and they purchased Ensoniq in 1998, who just so happened to be a competitor, and made the PCI 64 and PCI 128 sound cards using their technology. Then Creative learned how to make their own stuff later on and made the Sound Blaster Live at Wembley Stadium, July 13th, 1986. Freddie Mercury and Brian May and Queen playing Bohemian Rhapsody. People start doing 3D audio, whatever that means, and Creative keeps going, and everyone just kind of gives up. Except for Intel. Intel are back. Woo! Yeah, baby! I love you, Intel. I hope that you don't get dominated by another company soon. Intel released their Intel HD Audio, which is basically just integrated into their CPUs now, which basically drove the final nail in the coffin for these little sound card things. Windows 8 comes out in 2012, and they've removed the startup and the shutdown sounds. What the hell? The man behind the slaughter and bald guy, Jensen Harris, cites him not wanting to wake up his screaming and crying child in the middle of the night. Which I guess makes a little sense, but it still stinks because in 2016, Apple followed suit. They got rid of the like, what the hell? These are the guys who actually knew how to keep their brand identity. Why'd they get rid of that? These are both really stupid changes, which removed a lot of the nostalgia for actually using computers for a bunch of young children. They now yearn for the times where a little piece of music started playing when you booted up your computer. People miss that. But then, in 2020, Apple did the impossible. They brought back the startup chime! I love